I'm Michael Moreci.
And I'm Keir Graff.
Together, we are the Filmographers, and on this show, we discuss a director's entire career, one movie at a time. In our first season, we've been watching all of Steven Soderbergh's movies, from his very first, Sex, Lies, and Videotape,
to his last, Presence, or what will be his last film until 10 days from now, March 14th, when Black Bag opens in theaters nationwide.
Yes, we are not done with Soderbergh, and Soderbergh is not done with us. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a deep dive into our favorite auteur's very first horror movie, discussing the unique way it was made, how it fits into his filmography, and what we thought of it. And yes, we have discussed this movie before in our Filmographers Goes to the Movies episode, but here we're going to go much deeper into the film's creation, its reception, and more. But before we do that, Keir, one last time, I guess, give me your one-sentence summary of Soderbergh's 2025 release, Presence.
When a dysfunctional family with a grieving daughter moves into a new home, they discover they're not its only residence, and they share it, or the time-space continuum anyway, with a spectral presence that seems just as troubled as they are.
What's it like?
What's what like?
I never had anybody die.
Scary. And it goes on.
What do you mean?
Like, the world cracks apart. You fall into this hole. And the sides are mud, and you can't get out. And you wonder where they are. And you wonder what it would be like if you were there too.
Before we get into the making of Presence, I want to take a brief moment to remind listeners about our Patreon. It's where you can find all of our episodes, video and audio, as well as extras that you won't find anywhere else, like our upcoming audio commentary for Soderbergh's The Good German. Best of all, it is free to join. You can find us at patreon.com/thefilmographerspodcast.
And if you want to give us a small monthly tip, you can get some great rewards like a Filmographer's sticker or, my favorite, a Filmographer's coffee mug. Again, that's patreon.com/thefilmographerspodcast.
If Patreon is not your thing, that's all good. You can always still be part of the Filmographers community by leaving us a rating or a review on your podcasting platform of choice, or leave us a comment on our YouTube page.
Like Raymond Charound, who just recently commented on our review for The Monkey, saying, "I've been looking forward to hear your takes on movies since the Presence review. We'll check back here after I've seen this one."
Oh, that's really cool. Well, thank you, Raymond. We hope our thoughts on The Monkey lived up to your expectations. So very cool. Thank you for that. And one other bit of housekeeping here. We have not one, get this, not one, not two, but 3 upcoming live events.
Yes, that's right. We're going to be presenting a 25th anniversary screening of Aaron Brockovich on March 19th at the Lake Street Theater in Oak Park, Illinois. And we'll be following that a month later with the 25th anniversary screening of Traffic, the movie that helped Soderbergh beat Soderbergh to win an Oscar for Best Director. That one will be on April 23rd. And that is also at the Lake Street Theater in Oak Park.
And we'll also be introducing, so excited, we're introducing Out of Sight at the historic Music Box Theater in Chicago, my second home as a teenager, and that will be on April 7th. So if you're in or around the Chicagoland area, you won't want to miss these events. Tickets are on sale right now at each respective theater. Now, on to Presence, which, like many Soderbergh movies, was filmed in a very unique way.
Yeah, his relentless inventiveness never ceases to blow me away. We have chronicled the arc of his career, and we're up to 35 feature-length movies now, plus a half dozen TV series. And I think it's safe to say that his eagerness to do the old thing in a new way is really his hallmark.
Yeah, agreed, Keir. From shooting on videotape for full frontal, using an experimental digital camera for Che, that camera being the first of its kind, and in the jungle, no less, to making Unsane with an iPhone, Soderbergh has been at the tip of the spear for filmmaking technology for decades. Hell, I mean, sometimes there wasn't even a spear, so he went and made it himself.
And he's back at it here in Presence. Again, this man is over 60 years old. He's made nearly 40 movies and won an Oscar for Best Director, and he's still taking big swings. I mean, we're gushing, I know, but he's earned every bit of our praise. Steven Soderbergh is a champion of cinema, a vanguard of form, and one of the best to ever do it.
I will raise my Singani and toast to every word of that, Keir.
And okay. I don't have much Singani left, but I'll during the break, I'm going to have a little shot of Singani.
You know, I just bought a bottle like 2 weekends ago. I haven't opened it yet, but I have a fresh bottle of Singani.
I know how we're celebrating the end of this season.
Getting shit-faced on Singani. We've earned it, Keir.
We've earned it. Now, as for Presence, there is some pretty amazing stuff going on here. As most people already know, Soderbergh shot this movie with the camera strapped to his body. He basically played the ghost in this first-person ghost story. He filmed the movie with a Sony A7, a camera that costs less than $3,000. I mean, that's considerably less than the kind of cameras typically used to make a movie. In an interview with Filmmaker magazine, Soderbergh had this to say. We shot this on the newest iteration of the Sony DSLR, which is, as you know, a digital single-lens reflex camera. Its primary mode is as a still camera, but it also shoots really good video. It's small, and this new version has a sensor that was never used in a DSLR before. I did experiments with all the digital cameras that I'd worked with before and ones I hadn't. I stripped them down as much as I could, then put them on the smallest stabilization rig that would support them. What I discovered was that there was just a couple pounds difference between the camera I could use and stabilize and be able to back into any space I wanted to, and the next step up made that impossible because of the weight. We did all these tests with the Sony and this one rig, and I'm like, this'll work. It's not heavy.
Yeah, which of course is very important if you're going to have this rig more or less strapped to your body for 12 hours a day. I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is unimaginable just a matter of years ago, you know? So, I mean, that weight and ease and just having I'm sure you've seen the behind the scenes. So he has this like kind of like thing strapped to his chest, and he essentially has just a gimbal with the camera, and that's really it. There's so much you can do with it. It's pretty neat. So while the camera's weight and quality of video is important, there's another crucial detail to the A9 III that lends itself to how, is it the A9 or the A7? I'm sorry. What did you say, Keir?
A7.
A7, sorry, I said the A9. So the A7 that lends itself to how Presence specifically was made. Something different to Presence than a lot of other movies. So not only is the A7 a mirrorless camera, but it also has what's known as a global shutter. I'm sure you're wondering what that means.
I know I am. I kind of exhausted my understanding of cameras with that previous bit.
Oh, the same. I really had to do some research because it's not like I didn't know prior what a global shutter was or meant. But I do love this techie, nerdy cameras, film stuff. Like, it's really cool. And when I read about this, you know, like I said, I had no idea, but I was really, really intrigued. So here's what I discovered. And thanks, I have to give a shout out to Patrick Tomaso, who, Patrick, if for some reason you're watching this and I pronounced your last name incorrectly, I apologize. But Patrick is a really, really interesting guy who creates fascinating videos on YouTube and is an active commentator on social media. Seriously, check him out if you want to learn more about why exactly most modern movies look like shit. He does a lot with like lighting and, you know, scale and color and stuff like that. He really breaks it down in ways that are digestible, and we'll link his channel in the show notes because it's worth checking out. Anyway, thanks to Patrick, I learned that when a camera captures an image, it doesn't capture the image all at once. It scans an image line by line and creates basically an organized composite. Now, What this creates, this creation of an image line by line, is known as the rolling shutter effect. I'll explain it this way. So, Keir, like, have you ever watched a movie where the camera moves quickly from like one side to the next? You get the feeling that the alignment of the image is just like kind of off.
Yes, I definitely have. It seems like the bottom part of the image is just a hair off from the rest, like it's catching up or something.
Yes, and that's 100% it. That's exactly it. Again, because the image is being captured line by line. So imagine it actually literally being broken up and then put back together. If the camera moves too quickly, sometimes those lines aren't quite ready. So there's a lag. That's what you get in a rolling shutter. Now, with a global shutter, which is what Soderbergh used in Presence, that camera does capture the image all at once, not line by line, so you don't get that wobbly effect. There's no time delay. The alignment is perfect. The movement is smoother, which is exactly what Soderbergh needed for Presence. Even if you've only watched the trailer, you know that in this movie, the camera is moving all over the house. It's up, down, left, right. It's going all over the place. The ghost, who is Soderbergh, as you said.
Soderghost.
Yes, Soderghost, whatever. Whatever you want to call it.
I had Soder as a prefix to basically any word. Soder film.
Just go around your house. Is it time for Soder dinner? Is it time for
Soder drinks?
Soder. So it's always time for Soder drinks, as we already expressed. Anyway, when the Soderghost is whipping around the house, gliding all over the place, there's not any of that warping or distortion that you typically find with camera movement. In Presence, it is different.
Well, Stephen actually had to go through and kind of like plan out each scene as the presence. So that's his actor mind kind of kicking in and him saying like, oh no, I wouldn't look left yet, because the presence wouldn't know to look left. Stephen knows when to look left. The presence doesn't.
There were times, unfortunately, we would rehearse, but there would be times I'd get well into a take and make a mistake. I would anticipate somebody moving as opposed to having like a little bit of lag, which happens when you don't know that somebody's going to move. I'd have to go, cut, sorry, the ghost screwed up.
First-person POV movies aren't anything new. Dating back to 1947's Lady in the Lake, to Russian Ark, to Hardcore Henry, to basically every found footage horror movie, there's been a fair share of movies sharing this unique perspective. Not a ton, but some. Now, Keir, let me ask you, how do you think Soderbergh's decision shaped Presence? That's a harsh. Soderbergh's decision shaped Presence. There's a lot of S's and
that's like a good vocal warm up for an actor.
That is a good one. Yeah, maybe for a Soderbergh movie. Anyway, Keir, I want to get your thoughts about what he did to shape Presence. Could it be the same movie and have the same overall effect that it did if it had been shot differently?
Not at all. I mean, it could have been a similar story, of course, but the tone and the effect would have been so markedly different that it would have been a completely different film. I mean, yes, this is a drama with a script and characters and dialogue, but Soderbergh's decision to put himself, and by extension the audience, in the POV of the ghost makes it an experience, a very unsettling experience. And it also forces us to interact with the story in a different way. I mean, since we only see what the ghost sees and we never leave the house, it's a little bit like trying to solve a mystery, and that's very engaging. But because we also don't have any sense of the presence's presence or corporeality or even an internal monologue, the presence is a cipher to us. So seeing this in the theater made it just immersive, almost overwhelming. I mean, there were reports that, maybe this is just PR hype, but there were reports that people at Sundance found it so overwhelming they had to leave or they stumbled out or whatever. But, it is a little bit like the Breaking in the Waves thing, where it's a very different feeling watching this in the theater than a conventional movie. All these effects that he achieves just would not have been the case with standard camera setups.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And it's funny. I will say this. I didn't include this in preparing for this. But I will say that I found an article in IndieWire that said they were at the Sundance premiere that you referenced, and they could not confirm that anybody left during. So it might
marketing magic.
That might be a little bit of marketing magic. Hey, Neon does great with it. I mean, they did it for Long Legs. I think their marketing is doing well for The Monkey. You know, they do really, really well with their marketing. But no, I agree with you, and I'm glad you used that word experience. Like, I think that's a perfect way to put it. And I think we said that in our Goes to the Movie. We're like, listen, like we are urging people to see it in the theaters. We were saying this is something to experience. And while the home viewing is still good, I think still very good, I think the theatrical is very hard to beat, I would say. Yeah. So
agreed 100%.
Speaking of experience, there's something interesting, and I'll say this. There is a science, actual science, that says that our brains, and I'm jumping off from the thinking about the theatrical experience, but there's science that says that our brains respond in a different way, in a more positive way, to seeing movies on the big screen as opposed to seeing that at home. There's actual studies, research, etc., that says we enjoy things on larger screens at a larger scale than on smaller. We get more pleasure from it, which is why watching movies on your phone is bad. Stop it.
That's the kind of scientific study I can get behind. I would like to be a test subject as well.
Yes, and I will skew it dramatically to exact results I want to see. So there's science there in terms of like how we enjoy and process the experience of film. There's also science behind, and we've talked about this before on the show, Keir, the 180-degree rule, how the camera needs to stay on one side of a line between characters. Otherwise, viewers get visually disoriented and confused. From making a movie, I can tell you on the set, well, you always talk about what part of the world are we shooting? What side of the world are we on? So like if if the line is here, let's imagine, you and I are talking and we're lying here, then we're on this side. We stay on this side. The camera never goes to the other side of that, quote unquote world or that line. Okay. It just disorients, and people, studies show it disorientates people as they're watching. So in all this, I do have a point, and it's one that's shared by Soderbergh himself. Part of the necessary experience in watching a movie is sharing the perspective of the characters to a point. It's essential for us to see what they see, as in the case of Presence, but to also see how they react. It's how we relate to what's happening and how we engage with visual stories. Obviously, again, in Presence, we never get the visual reaction. We see the ghost, at times, like it lashes out. It does certain limited physical things, causes things to happen more or less, but we never see the human face that conveys to us how the presence actually feels. And that's probably why, the biggest reason why, not having that, like, okay, we're following a character, so Keir, we're following you, you see something, and then the camera gets the shot of you reacting, getting your emotional response, and then we kind of react to that emotional response. That's how visual storytelling works. That's probably why we don't get a ton of first-person POV movies, because we're lacking that, and it's so part of the experience, but it's also a testament to Presence working, because it does, like you said, it works thoroughly. Now, I'm going to read a passage from a piece, again, talking about IndieWire, and I think this is where I saw that Sundance thing. Chris O'Flatt says, and I would go to the quote, "Presence is an 85-minute feature film that unfolds entirely through the point of view of a ghost, or more accurately, a presence, as the title alludes to, who watches a dysfunctional family of four move into a large suburban home and over time witness the most intimate and disturbing moments. What's remarkable about Soderbergh's formal experience is that it narratively works. Regardless if seen as a gimmick or a smart use of form, the experiment does not stop the viewer from being emotionally drawn into the drama of the highly dysfunctional family coming apart, nor the mounting mystery surrounding the presence." End quote. So, despite, again, it's kind of cool that against all odds and what we typically need from a story, Soderbergh bucks that, and as Chris O'Flatt says, it's not just a narrative gimmick. There is something powerful to it. I'm going to read just a little bit more from this. Later, it's in the same article.
I think one of the reasons those kind of first person movies so rarely are successful is it ends up feeling like a gimmick. I don't know if you remember SCTV's famous sketch 3D House of Pancakes, where they were
No, I don't.
It was very, very funny. John Candy, like with the spatula of pancakes, like serving them very aggressively towards the camera, and spoofing the comical lengths that 3D films will go to just kind of, take advantage of the technology. And typically when you see kind of first person POV in film, a lot of times it's very gimmicky because they're just, it's like you see the hand reach out and you see it's really trying to be like the camera is like the head on the shoulders. And so, you see somebody open the fridge, you see them look in or they go to a mirror and instead of the camera, you see the actual actor's reflection in the mirror and they're touching their face or whatever. And it just feels like they're trying so much to get mileage out of it. And I think, Soderbergh just doesn't seem concerned with that in Presence at all. He's much more concerned with really getting something on the faces of the people reacting to the presence or the people that the presence is observing. And because the presence is this unobtrusive presence, it's not most of the scenes it's observing, it is not interacting, it's not a player. So we're just kind of getting these little stolen moments and we're voyeuristically observing the family. We don't have to care about the physicality of the presence or if it was a human character, I think it would just not succeed.
Yeah, I agree. And I love that you said that. It's very smart and you're very right because like I mentioned Lady in the Lake, the 1947, adaptation of the Raymond Chandler novel. And it really is a gimmick. And they're trying to, I think that the effect that they're going for is not only putting you in the shoes of Marlowe, but it's trying to like you're knowing what he knows. So whatever happens in the mystery as it unfolds, like you're along for the ride of solving the mystery. You see what he sees, experience what he sees, but you always are going to fall short because you can't know what Marlowe knows as a character. Like Marlowe obviously has the experience and the wisdom, and he's going to react certain ways. Like Soderbergh says, like you're going to see. Like when Bogart plays Marlowe, you're going to see him react in a certain way, and that's going to inform you. Does he believe this person? Does he buy what they're saying? What?
And he can tell you whether he believes it without saying a word because his face is his instrument, and so just that reaction shot as somebody tells him something, and you see his expression, and that's one of the joys of watching a great actor, of course.
Yeah. I mean, I forget what director. I was reading about this recently. Just threw it. This didn't happen recently, but I read about it recently. They threw a tantrum where they're like, "You act with your eyes, God damn it!" Like scolding an actor, and it's like, I mean, one, that's true, and two, like first person perspective robs that completely, except for those moments you see someone in the mirror, which are again, a gimmick. It's gimmicky. Like, oh, that's what they look like. It's like, okay.
Like Humphrey Bogart in Dark Passage, like takes off the bandages like, oh, now I know what I look like. I look like Humphrey Bogart after my plastic surgery.
Which is a direct quote from the movie. He's like, holy shit, I look like Humphrey Bogart.
Yeah, I mean, that was a very meta movie for that era.
Very, yes, they really were onto something. But no, I mean, I think you're absolutely right that like it's in Presence specifically. It becomes a vehicle. The Presence probably doesn't have a form the way a human has a form. It's a presence. It's not a person. There is no person behind it. So you have a formless and we'll talk about this, I think, a bit when we talk about the ending of the movie. There's like a timeless, not that it's timeless in the sense that like it doesn't age, but like the narrative fractures into a continuum of time that like is straightforward, but we're told basically, I don't think it's spoiling anything, but if it is, apologies. We're told that the presence doesn't experience time the way we do. So there's also a sense that like, again, that floating through space and time that isn't the way a person like me or like you would experience space or time.
Yeah.
So let me get back to that article from IndieWire. And this is a quote from Soderbergh himself. And he says, quote, "I've been convinced you don't have a movie if you don't have that," meaning the emotional response where you see the characters. and not in a first-person perspective. Continuing the quote, he says, "If you can't see what the character's feeling emotionally, you don't have a movie," said Soderbergh. "But here I am, literally tearing down the structure that I have built. And my only justification is, here, if you did a reverse, there wouldn't be anything to see." End quote.
Boom. Drop the mic. We should note that Soderbergh might have felt a stronger than usual personal connection to this story, because even though it was written by frequent collaborator David Koepp, who also wrote Kimmy and the upcoming Black Bag, the idea for Presence originated with Soderbergh. And we could paraphrase this, but I think we should let Soderbergh himself tell the story, because it's really something.
My wife and I were away for a while, and we hired a house sitter, and she saw a ghost in the house. And this is somebody that we're inclined to take seriously. And so we did a little research and discovered that somebody had died in the house in the master bedroom. And in fact, our neighbor said this woman was killed by her daughter. The police said it was a suicide. This neighbor said it was not a suicide. So when I discovered this, I wondered, because I was the child of a mother who was a parapsychologist, what this woman, we gave her a name, Mimi, what she would think if she had new people showing up in her house, what she felt like was her house. That was the initial idea, and I wrote a handful of script pages describing the beginning. You're looking in a room, you're moving around, it's eye level, it seems to be a person, and cut to black, time shift, a new image, somebody's coming to show the house to a family. That's what I gave. I gave David Koepp those handful of pages and said, "Do you think there's something here?" And he said, "I know what to do with this." And he took it and ran.
Soderbergh always gives a great interview. And speaking of interviews, it feels like a good time to mention that we did our own interview with Chris Sullivan, one of the stars of Presence. And man, what a terrific job he did. He was remarkable. But in our interview with Chris, we spoke about the movie, we spoke about the making of it, and we even dug into his previous work with Soderbergh on the TV series The Knick.
You can find that on our YouTube channel or our podcast catalog or via the link in the show notes. And by the way, if anyone's listening to this who has any connection to Steven Soderbergh at all, we would also like to interview Steven Soderbergh. It would be a great end to this season. We'll be reaching out.
I hope so. I really, really hope so. I feel like we've earned it. More than Hot Ones.
Yes, more than Hot Ones.
Now, Keir, part of what we do here on the Filmographers is examine a movie in the context of the time it was released. That's a bit strange thing to do with Presence, because it just came out a few weeks ago at the time of this recording. And yet, I still think there's something interesting to discuss here. Maybe not about Hollywood at large, but about how Presence fits into the arc of Soderbergh's career.
Yeah, no, I agree for sure. Okay, so looking at his 4 previous movies, Let Them All Talk, No Sudden Move, Kimmy, and Magic Mike's Last Dance, all of them were made for Max, the channel formerly known as HBO. Magic Mike did receive a theatrical release, but it was so last minute that no one, neither Max nor audiences, seemed prepared for it, and it performed accordingly. The others were released via streaming only.
Yeah, and before that, you have his 2 Netflix movies, High Flying Bird and The Laundromat. So basically, prior to Presence in 2025, we haven't had a proper Soderbergh theatrical release since 2018's Unsane, which feels long ago. I mean, 7 years is a long time, but feels longer. It feels like Unsane. I mean, he's peppered so many in between, but man, that feels like Unsane feels like an old movie.
Well, there's regular director years and then there's Soderbergh years. So it's Soder years.
Soder years. Yeah, no, it does feel like a relic. It does. And like Keir, like you said, Magic Mike didn't really have it got released in theaters, but I don't think anyone's crazy about, anybody. It's very memorable, I guess.
We're not going to count that as a real theatrical release, is I think what we're saying here.
Yeah.
So many factors played into Soderbergh's pivot to streaming. The Hollywood's perception that mid-budget movies for adults were not box office draws, theater closures during the COVID pandemic, his pivot to shooting on digital, and streaming services looking to build their libraries with quick and dependable movies, and for a while paying a lot of money for those. And of course, you think about that, like Soderbergh would be a prime target because he's better at quick and dependable movies than just about anyone.
Yeah, I mean, no kidding. If you're going to have a Rolodex, I mean, you just stuff it with Soderbergh and that's it.
Get me Soderbergh. I need a $3 million movie. That's going to be pretty cool. But yeah, as we've discussed in recent episodes, because of all that, because of the real focus on streaming, it just feels like Soderbergh's cultural presence hasn't been as significant as it was in years past.
No, it doesn't. But what's cool is that now he's back. He's back with presence. And it's not just because, we don't say back just because the movie was released theatrical, but it's also the road that it took to get a theatrical release. See, Presence was independently financed. I don't know how it got its money. I tried to find out, but I'm betting, it was different channels of private equity, which Soderbergh surely doesn't have, too much trouble acquiring, I'm going to assume. I'm sure it's not easy, but easier than most, I would say.
Yeah. I'm sure people will write him a significant check.
I think so. I'm willing to bet there's got to be somebody. Hell, I would throw in for it. So Presence was made with that private equity or whatever the case is. It was made for a little less than $2 million and it was shot over just 11 days, which is, that's as efficient as it comes, which allows you to have a very reasonable budget of $2 million. The movie premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in 2024 and received rave reviews. But that's maybe not the most interesting story about Soderbergh being at Sundance.
No, it is not. As chronicled previously on this show, Soderbergh was once the poster boy, not only for Sundance, but, the American indie film movement. When Sex, Lies, and Videotape was a breakout hit, the film festival helped put Soderbergh on the map. And you could argue that Soderbergh helped put Sundance, which was then still known as the American Film Festival, become the biggest indie movie festival in the country. Soderbergh caught the eye of Robert Redford, the driving force behind Sundance. It isn't called Sundance on accident.
It's not the Butch Cassidy Fest.
No, it is not. And so Redford, who had a history of both nurturing and bigfooting new talent that came through Sundance, came on as a producer of Soderbergh's third film, King of the Hill. But he grew impatient with Soderbergh's pace. Soderbergh, suddenly in demand, decided to do Kafka first and was also considering making The Last Ship for Sidney Pollack before King of the Hill. Redford is not known as a great communicator, and Soderbergh is not much of an accommodator, so the relationship was already strained when Redford flat out stole Quiz Show, a movie Soderbergh very much wanted to make, right out from under him. As a result, Soderbergh didn't go back to Sundance for a long, long time. He became more associated with Slamdance, the gritty Sundance offshoot. That is, until January 2024.
Yeah, and the gamble, the swallowing of pride, whatever you want to call it, it paid off. Presence was received wonderfully by audiences and critics, ended up being one of the buzziest movies to play at the festival that year. So buzzy, in fact, that there was a bidding war over it with as many as 9 distributors reportedly vying for the rights. As we already said, Neon won out, acquiring Presence for $5 million. Soderbergh paid back his investors. I hope he paid back his investors.
I'm sure he did.
Yes, I'm sure he paid him back. So he paid back his investors. Presence had a home and Neon had a Soderbergh. So I don't know. Everybody wins.
Or is almost winning or about to win. Presence had a $3.3 million opening weekend and has grossed over $9 million worldwide to date. As we've noted before, you typically have to double your budget in order to break even. In this case, that would be doubling Neon's acquisition price. And Presence has very nearly done that. And with the streaming deals Neon has surely made, VOD rentals, and a Blu-ray coming in May from Decal, Neon will come out in the black, and Soderbergh will have a nice little hit on his hands. It's all about scale, right? Like, if you make a movie cheap enough, you can have a hit, even though if it doesn't gross that much money. And that's really what Soderbergh is all about.
It's funny, and I love that story about Soderbergh and Redford. So we don't get a whole lot of dirt this season. Soderbergh's pretty neat and tidy guy, but I do love that. I wish we had more of the dirt here. But it does feel like, thinking of like Sex, Lies, and Videotape, it still feels like a little bit of a relic of the way movies are made and tour at festivals and bought and distributed, like in an actual movie theater distributed. Grant Presence probably didn't get the biggest theatrical push. It's a January release. Neon did, I think, well. I think they pumped it up enough. Like we said, they had the whole like people leaving the theater. But what's curious about that, Keir, which I would really want to know, is like, why did it sit on the shelf for a year?
Yeah.
But like, it just feels like a relic of like, hey, here's this buzzy movie, cool director, cool thing going on, very reasonable price tag, gets bought up at a festival. It still played a few more. It played at a Fantastic Fest, I know that. I think it played a few places prior to its release in this past January. But it just, I don't know, there's something kind of warm and comforting to be like, oh, remember the time, like when these kind of things happen. But, we don't get that a ton anymore.
Soderbergh's back. He's Soderback.
Some of you may know this, but not only do I live in Chicago, this is where I was born and raised. And one of the best things about living in this city, by far, is being able to take advantage of its amazing arts culture, particularly its movies culture. And when you talk about movies in Chicago, you cannot have a conversation without including the Music Box Theater. It's been a landmark here for over 95 years, and it's been like a second home to me for most of my life. On April 7th, we're going to introduce one of Keir's and my favorite movies at one of our favorite movie houses. Join us as the Filmographers present Steven Soderbergh's Out of Sight, one night only, at the Music Box Theater. We're honored, thrilled, and cannot wait for April 7th to get here. Tickets are on sale right now at musicboxtheater.com. That's theater with an R-E, not an E-R. Join us for an evening of Clooney, Lopez, Cheadle, and Soderbergh, all of it projected on one of the best screens in the world. Keir, I know we've already done our Go to the Movies episode on Presence. We gave our general thoughts there, but can you give me your thoughts about Presence again, one last time, and tell me if your opinion has changed with a little bit of distance from the film?
Yeah, I'll just share a few thoughts. I don't want listeners to worry that I'm going to cover any of the same ground, but I rewatched it last night, video on demand. It just became available the night before. And so that was the first time I'd seen it since the theater. I intended to go see it a second time in the theater. I got busy. It didn't happen. But it's interesting. I was surprised at how well I remembered most of it from the theater, maybe because it's a short film. But I also was really glad to watch it again more closely because, as I'm going to talk about in a moment, there were some things I kind of understood differently based on a second viewing. I think my biggest takeaway rewatching is that, as you alluded to earlier, this is definitely a film to be seen in the theater. And it's a shame that it's out of theaters now. I mean, if anybody is listening to this episode and they haven't seen it, and, I encourage you to see it however you can, watch it on the biggest screen you possibly can. It is definitely, Soderbergh has talked about how he doesn't care about how people see his movies. He's talked about how he doesn't care if people see them in the theater or on their phone or, their TV or whatever, which kind of puzzles me and is a little disappointing. I think this film is
absolutely wrong, Soderbergh. You're wrong.
We love you, but you're wrong, Steve. This film in particular, of all his recent films, should be seen on a big screen. It's a very different experience, and it's a better experience. As you said, it's still good on a smaller screen, but it is very different. Like, you want to immerse yourself in this. You should watch it on the biggest screen you can without pausing, without taking breaks. Surrender to the movie. It's short. Let it work its spell on you. So I was not as engaged the second time for the mere fact that it was on a smaller screen. It's still a very, very good film. It's great. It's a great movie. I don't know if it's capital G great, but it's definitely good Soderbergh material. I loved the swing he took. I think it's executed really well. But I wish I could have seen it again in a theater. As you said earlier, Chris Sullivan as Chris Payne is just excellent. It's a good ensemble piece. His relationship with his daughter, and he gets the best monologue. And I would say his relationship with Chloe, the character, he also plays a character named Chris. So the character Chris and his daughter Chloe, their relationship, and then his monologue to her when he basically says, you're different and don't ever change. Your difference is the thing that makes you special. That is the heart of the movie. And they both deliver excellent performances. She's a younger actor. She in some ways doesn't get as much kind of nuanced stuff to do, but I think she more than rises to her role. I think everybody's very good in this, but maybe it's just because, we've had the opportunity to speak to Sullivan on the show. I think he really has the opportunity to show a depth of character and some soul in his performance that is just remarkable. But his relationship with Lucy Liu, as she plays Rebecca, his wife, that's a great, messed up marriage, but a great acting relationship. Very spiky encounter. There's a moment where he says to her something like, have you ever noticed that your solution to everything is like basically we do nothing? And there's this long pause. And then what's the word? She just says one word back to him like several times as she walks away and opens her laptop at a different table. And it's a very true, if heartbreaking moment in a marriage. I think they do great together. And as dysfunctional as this family is, it's not all sadness. There's also some funny moments, like after the family recognizes that they are all living with the presence. And one of the kids says to her, she likes a cigarette. One of the kids says to her, "Since when do you smoke?" And she says, 2003. I mean, that's a laugh line. It's great. It's not all one thing. It's in the way that, any tragedy should have a little comedy, or any comedy should have a little tragedy. Any scary movie should have some light moments. Like this delivers. I did notice a couple of quibbles on rewatching, and they're quibbles. There's a scene where the family's sitting at dinner, and the siblings, Chloe and Tyler, who like fight throughout, are seated on the same side of the table so that Soderbergh can film it as a nice dinner tableau. But in real life, there's no way those two sit next to each other at the table. There's just no way. It's glaring, and it feels like a rare Soderbergh misstep because it feels like it's for his advantage as the cameraman and not for the characters. And I found myself wondering, like, why not shoot it in the same way you shot, dinner during Sex, Lies, and Videotape, where he had people sitting, around the table, and he, kind of carries the camera around. Then I thought, well, he probably didn't do it because he just hates repeating himself. But
or just because it's, like we said, the 180-degree rule. Put everybody on the same line. Voila. A lot easier. Yeah. I mean, I've heard directors say the hardest thing to shoot is people sitting at a table, because like you're constantly have to navigate the rule. Like, I mean, he does. I mean, look, people do it, don't get me. Yeah. I mean, it's not impossible, but like it is a little bit harder. It's a little bit trickier. And the more people you throw into it, the harder it gets. So 4 is not too bad, but like it does make life a little easier, makes those 11 days go by even quicker.
It does. But it just felt to me like the rare instance of like Soderbergh taking the easy way out, because he doesn't. Sure. He never takes the easy way out. And again, it's a problem he solved in his very first movie when, I think I remember reading something, one of the actors in that dinner scene in Sex Lies was saying, was talking about how they were acting, and he's carrying the camera around and he's popping up here and there and he's moving the camera. And, it was a very assured scene for a first-time director. I mean, he really pulled that off. Again, it's a quibble, but it's something that kind of, like anything that takes you out of the reality of a movie is perhaps a misstep. And that one made me think about him shooting it and not about what the characters were saying or how the actors were interacting. I didn't have too many quibbles, though, rewatching it. I was, again, just very impressed with the movie. I was very impressed with its construction. I have some more to say about the ending, but I'll get to that in a minute. Mike, what did you think, rewatching?
My thoughts really haven't changed. And by the way, for everybody watching, it is available on VOD. You can rent it. I believe it was $9.99 to rent, $20 to buy, which is absurd, but $20 to buy, $10 to rent. You can find it, Amazon, Apple, Vudu. I guess if you're still doing Vudu,
rent it and then buy the DVD when it comes out.
By the way, yeah, it looks like it's going to be a suite from Decal's got a good 4K version coming out. So that's good. And that's in, I believe, in May. But yeah, as for the movie, I appreciate, all the things. I agree with all the things. And I don't really have much to add, so I'm not going to. But I will say, the one thing that I really appreciate as you were talking, Keir, that I really like about Presence is just the simple fact of that it being an experience. The theatrical experience has become so precarious and so precious in so many ways. And we've come to equate, see it on the big screen, I'll see it on the biggest screen possible. That has come to mean see it on a big screen because shit gets blowed up, and like, it's like, the this shot for IMAX, which is cool. I guess. It's the whole shot in IMAX is such a gimmick. Is such a gimmick, dude. Like, who actually has? We live in Chicago. There's not even an IMAX theater here anymore.
Well, there's one on Western that's. It's not like the great old IMAX of old. It's pretty good. It's not like Navy Pier IMAX.
They'll call themselves IMAX. They will surely brand themselves as IMAX, but like in terms of like you said, the Navy Pier, like a proper IMAX theater, are like few and far between. They basically don't even exist. So you can shoot it on IMAX as much as you want. If you put it up on a janky screen that's like 2 inches larger than a regular screen. Like,
there's one in the suburbs near me that calls itself an IMAX theater. That's just like a regular old fashioned movie screen. Like, it's just the size a movie screen should be.
Yeah, it's just a bed sheet, nailed to the wall. Like, wait a second.
Bed sheet IMAX.
Yeah. But you know what I mean? I think listeners will know what I mean too. It's like, you must see on the big screen because it's going to be explosions and special effects and all this extravaganza and all this kind of shit. Right. And it's like, fine, you can say that and you can enjoy that. Like, this coming from the guy who's I'm taking my kids to go see the new Captain America, whatever it's called. I don't even know. I don't care, but I'm going to go take them to see it nonetheless because they're into it. And yes, that's something like, see the big screen because Red Hulk's going to be huge. Okay, fine. But like, what Presence does is give us an experience that reminds us that like theatrical can be also a $2 million movie. You don't need to have, to go to a big screen, I will see anything on a movie theater. I don't care what it is. I'll go see The Lady Eve from 1940 or 1930, whatever, from Preston Sturges, where that wasn't even a concern, right? I will see anything on big screen. But you can also have the experience for big screen not be limited to just the extravaganzas. You can also have a cool $2 million, clever, smart movie filmed in a unique way, be a necessity to see on a larger screen for the experience. Like I said, you just enjoy it more in general, but for the experience of letting it, I don't know, for lack of a better term, wash over you. And that's what Presence does. Like, it just whisks you away. And what I love about it, what works hand in hand with the way that Soderbergh shot it, is Cap's script for it. You touched on this a bit, that like you get this really compelling vision of a family that surely has its problems, as most families do, right? It feels very honest. It feels very true. But the experience of it is not really, it is linear. I don't want to say it's not linear, but it's also not. There's a different sort of continuity to it in terms of like, you're just it's a kind of elliptical, I guess you can say, right? So couple that with the way that it's filmed, and the movie feels different. And I think the full experience, I think we both agree, we're saying the same thing, is best in a movie theater. Now, watching at home, I still think it's great. I do. That elliptical storyline, the way that Cap wrote it, and the way probably Soderbergh's editing has to do. He is the editor. Marianne Bernard edited it. So it's still Soderbergh, but like the editing has something to do with that too. But it's just a uniquely structured movie, a uniquely shot movie. The characters are compelling. Lucy Liu, Chris Sullivan, all the kids are fantastic. They all do a great job. I like that it's a different kind of, ghost story / horror film. And I've heard, I've seen some complaints about it, about that it's the horror being not horrific enough and not being your typical trappings of a horror movie. And I guess, but like, I kind of like that breath of fresh air, like similarly, I saw some people not enjoying the script as much. Like it was just like a kind of something that kept banged out because it felt incomplete. But that incompleteness, that elliptical structure, is what I think made it work. It exists in the gaps in what you see and the gaps in between what you see, which is oftentimes harder to do. It's harder not to make your horror be the conventional, ooh, the presence is gonna, where's it gonna be? It's jumping, like that typical stuff. So I don't like it when anybody assumes that, like, oh boy, he just pulled this from his drawer and they shot it in 11 days. Like, no, I don't think so. There's a lot of thoughtfulness that went into that, and bucking conventions is arguably harder than just adhering to conventions. And every turn, presence bucks conventions at every turn. Like we've said this before, I appreciate the swing, but I also just enjoy the swing. I enjoy seeing, yes, it's a story that we've seen, it's the ghost story with the twist that dates back to 19th century literature. Fine. Henry James, way back. Okay. But it's still done really well. It's still compelling. The characters are great. The story is good. It has a unique way of being filmed. I really liked it. I liked it. Like you, I think we can both say liked it a lot. And I'm going to revisit it many more times, I'm sure, in the coming years.
Now let's talk about the ending.
Let's talk about the ending, finally. Or wait, can you tell me, you're more of the book guys. Henry James, 20th century, right? But there are ghost stories from 19th century, right?
Oh, yeah.
I don't sound like a total maroon, do I?
No.
Those ghost stories from 1487. No.
Yeah. I mean, there's, although, as I'll say in a moment, I mean, this particular twist on a ghost story is something I feel like I haven't seen.
True. Yeah, it's true. What is the twist, Keir? What is the ending? Go, Keir, go.
Mike, we always avoid spoilers in our Go to the Movies episodes, but we do spoilers in our regular episodes. And usually it's not a problem because we're talking about movies that have been out for years and years. And if someone gets mad because we spoiled the ending of Erin Brockovich, I'm willing to take the hit. This is the first time we've covered in depth a movie that came out, a month ago, but I want to talk about the ending. So listeners, if you haven't seen Presence and don't want the ending ruined, pause now and don't come back until you've seen the movie.
I think that's fair enough. I think that is a very considerate warning, Keir.
We try to be considerate. We're the film nice guys. Now, the first time we saw this movie at a distributor screening at Alamo Drafthouse, I didn't exactly feel like I became the ghost, but I was definitely having an out-of-body experience. I just surrendered to the moment, and I wasn't trying to anticipate or solve the plot in the way I normally do. That said, there's a mystery, who is the ghost? And I was sort of forming a theory. Kalina Lang, who plays Chloe, the Payne's daughter, is clearly fragile. She's grieving the death of her best friend, Nadia, who has overdosed. And when Chloe first realizes she's sharing the room with a ghost, she believes it's her friend trying to communicate, which probably helps her from being too afraid of it. And while we don't really understand its motives, and it sometimes seems scary and angry, it does truly seem to care for Chloe and want to help her. It tidies her room while she's in the shower. When her psycho boyfriend, Ryan, tries to roofie her, it spills the glass and saves her. And by that time, we know it's truly on her side. And there's another clue when the psychic comes to their house and says the presence is somehow unmoored from time.
You have a presence here. It feels connected to you.
Do you know who she is? Is it Nadia?
It's confused. It doesn't know why it's here. Something happened to it, probably here in this house. It's trying to figure you out. It's trying to figure itself out. Time, it doesn't work the same way for it. Past, present can be happening at the same, so it doesn't even know when it is. There's something that it needs to do, but it doesn't know what.
And then, of course, during the shocking, tragic ending, Chloe's brother Tyler rescues her from Ryan at the cost of his own life. And the second shocking, tragic ending when Rebecca, the mom, looks into the mirror and sees the face of Ryan staring back at her. Now, during our reaction video, I suggested there might be two explanations for the ghost's identity, which our producer Kevin totally scoffed at, perhaps justifiably. Having had time to think about it, and especially after watching the movie again last night, I do totally agree that although Kep's script does a nice bait and switch, teasing us with the possibility that the ghost or presence is Nadia, I think it's clearly Soderbergh's intention to say that Tyler was the ghost all along. That certainly makes a lot more sense than Nadia. I mean, Nadia would certainly know that Ryan is dangerous, but she wouldn't necessarily know where Chloe is living because Chloe has recently moved into this new house. Nadia had no connection to this house. Now, I think it basically works, but I still kind of have 4 separate issues with this. One of the first times we see the ghost is when it lingers on the photo of Chloe and Nadia, which is a red herring designed to make us think that the ghost is Nadia. But it then tidies Chloe's books, which is not in character for Tyler, whether alive or dead. He's not the type of guy to clean up his sister's room. So I feel like that's also a red herring, but it's also just an inconsistency. 2.
Can I ask you a question really fast? How much did this stuff bother you? Because I'm going to throw another inconsistency out at you, okay? And I'm sorry if I'm I don't
derailing my list.
No, I don't think I am, because like you mentioned, and I thought about this too, like the ghost, the presence, knocks off the roofie in her room, right?
Yeah.
Or, like midway through the movie. But then when she's getting roofie again, he doesn't do anything. Why doesn't the ghost or presence do something then? You know? It reminds me, so I'll do this quick. It reminds me in 7. This is the one thing in 7 that drives me nuts. Yeah. Remember when the photographer comes and it's John Doe, it's Kevin Spacey. Like he comes to the crime scene and he's taking pictures, and Brad Pitt like beats him away and is like, get out of here, and yells at him. And Morgan Freeman's like, well, those guys pay good money, you know? What bugs me about that is that in order for Kevin Spacey to have been there, and what Morgan Freeman is implying is that, or Somerset rather, is implying that he contacted this photographer, gave him the tip, and then was going to be paid. So when they see the photos later in the movie and they realize that was the shit, they're like, that was the photographer in the stairwell is the killer. Why didn't Morgan Freeman be like, oh, I have his phone number, right?
Yeah. Wow. That's that never occurred to me, and I think that's a very good catch. And yeah, that kind of stuff. And I think that's also a really good point. That's not even on my list. My list could have been 5 things, Mike. You're right. Like, why does the presence, instead of knocking off the glass the second time, why does it have to go down and then wake up the slumbering Tyler? That's a good point. I guess I'm sharing my little list of things that kind of irk me, because they do bug me enough to keep from saying like, this is a perfect movie. Like, this is like a classic that will live forever. It doesn't diminish my enjoyment of the movie too much, because most movies you're going to see one time. And in the theater, even though I had some questions and a couple of things I was confused about, I was along for the ride. As I said during our reaction video, I mean, the second ending, when Tyler appears in the mirror, I mean, I full body shiver. I mean, I was definitely into this movie, but it's the kind of thing that as I play it back and or I watch it again, some of these little things get me a little more. And I feel like this is, as we said about Soderbergh in the past, sometimes he moves so quickly that I think instead of, if he were I was about to say Fincher, but ironically, this one got past Fincher too, right?
Right.
But generally speaking, I would say there are fewer inconsistencies in a Fincher film than a Soderbergh film, because Soderbergh is going to move fast and quick, and he's not worried about perfection.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think sometimes the details do get a little lost. But what you have more, right?
I have more.
I want to hear more of these. I'm intrigued.
This is not a rant, but I'm just sharing, and partly I'm sharing to explain to Kevin and to anyone else why I was pondering 2 alternate explanations the first time I saw the movie. So, number 2. The presence's first big angry freakout happens after Tyler tells his horrific story about, quote unquote, pranking a girl. And really it's, God is bullying this girl into sharing a nude pic and then humiliating her in front of her classmates, to the point that she leaves school, and Tyler is just, he's laughing about it. Ha ha ha. After hearing this story, the ghost goes straight to Tyler's room and trashes his swimming trophies, which also seems out of character for Tyler, both living and dead. We could say that if the presence is now this evolved version of Tyler since he's dead, he's mad at himself. But we've also been told the presence doesn't know what it wants, and it's really confused as to why it's even there. So why does it do that?
That's a great question as well. Yeah.
And it's another reason that that was leading me to think that really the presence wasn't Tyler. You know, my first kind of reading of the movie in the moment was that there was another ghost in the house that they moved into. They inherited this ghost, and this ghost was observing stuff and became aware that this is a bad dude. And I'll get to more in a moment. So 3, I think there's a big, so the psychic tells us, as we've heard the quote, that, the ghost doesn't know where it is in time, and that time works differently for it. But to me, there's a big difference between the ghost not understanding where it exists in time and Tyler's ghost being able to exist before Tyler is even dead. I understand that time is relative, etc., yada, yada. But for the plot device to work, we have to accept that ghosts are not only confused by time, but can travel through time.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting supernatural plot device, but it's one I've never seen before. And I think with good reason, because it's kind of confusing.
Yeah, that one I also came across that I found puzzling, because it's weird that, it stays in a still contained time frame. The presence, stays in a time frame that it doesn't go back to 1873. What prevents it from just being unstuck in time, as Vonnegut would say, unstuck in time completely, and just bouncing over the ages, rather than over, what seems like, I guess, a couple months, I'm going to say weeks, maybe.
Yeah. It moves back to kind of precisely the right moment, and then kind of moves forward and kind of learns what to do. If it really was that confused, whatever. I know it's all mystical, and we can sort of assume that there's some energy attaching it to the family, and it has some, unformed impulse to do the right thing. And, I can accept all of that, but I do feel like that was, for a film that has a very naturalistic, it's a naturalistic ghost story. And that's one of the things I liked about it. But then it asks us to accept this very big jump that it's alive before Tyler is dead, which that's
tough.
I struggled with.
Yeah, that makes sense. I buy that. I think that's, yeah, I'm into that. Yeah.
I appreciate that, because I was starting to feel like I was alone and I was crazy.
No. Because I think it's tough, because the rules are very loose, I guess, in presence. And on one hand, you're like, hey, well, we're not really concerned about it. We being Cap Soderbergh, et cetera. We're not really concerned about the nitty gritty of of the afterlife, basically. And it's okay, yeah. And I'm not a stickler for that either. I'm no. This is, you got to follow these kind of certain logic. But when you start to get into this territory where it's getting a little confusing, where it's getting a little murky, as you're describing, then you're maybe this did need to be cleaned up in some way, somehow.
I think they could have tightened it a little bit. It's the classic, honestly, it's the classic problem with time travel movies. It's not really a time travel movie, but it sort of is. They always break down at some point. So I think that this movie passes muster basically on first viewing, but it also has the potential to be a little confusing. And I think that, I think they could have addressed some of this stuff just in the writing. Okay, my last point, the fourth point, is when Rebecca sees Tyler in the mirror, he's not moving. He looks trapped. And watching the movie in the theater, I missed the blink of an eye moment where he disappears from the mirror. I saw that when I watched it last night. So when the camera rises out of the house over the treetops like a soul being released, I thought the ghost who lived in the house had been released by saving Chloe, and it was Tyler who was now doomed to be the new ghost in the house. And when his mom, Rebecca, says something like, he came back to save you, I think that's Cap and Soderbergh trying to underline what actually happened. But to me, in that moment, I was like, well, she's been wrong about everything else so far. So why is she not wrong about this also?
Yeah, which could be... that makes... the flourish is good. You kind of rise. You came into the house... told a story, then you come out.
Yeah.
But it's like saying that there's two different perspectives behind the camera then, right? Like there's the omniscient perspective, and then there's the limited perspective. The limited being the ghost, the omniscient being, in this case, just the hand of God, aka the director. So like, again, you just get a little murkiness to it, because which one is it? And I don't know that you can have both. Like, I guess I like the poeticism of it. That's like, okay, we've had this moment, the family's moving on, the story's over, so we're just going to kind of like rise, but it also rise out of the house,
Yeah.
But it also creates a contradiction of terms, right? Of like, but
yeah,
we've said the camera is this and fixed in this way and going, and it's limited to this, and now it's breaking that. So what does that mean? Does it mean that, like you said, is Tyler's soul released? Well, but that doesn't make sense, because if it's unstuck in time, then you're saying that, like, that doesn't work. That like, if it's unstuck in this moment, then does it just get unstuck forever then? Then how does it go back in time? Then that becomes, now we're like going to be like putting strings on a wall and like going to be like tacking shit and being like, okay, here's this timeline, then the present timeline, and
the presence wall is crazy. Yeah, I agree. It's a very poetic bookend to the movie. But, and it's arguable whether this is truly a horror film. I mean, I think you have to kind of categorize it in the horror genre, but it is more of a ghost story, which is a more gentle form of horror, et cetera, et cetera. I do think that the ending, had we ended with this sense that if in effect, if we would have gone with kind of my alternate version of things, I think it would have been more horrific. Like the idea that Tyler is now trapped there. He's the new ghost for the next family who moves in. I think that's more of a horror ending. Frankly, I like it a little more. But, in a way, Soderbergh gave us the kind of healing ending, which, maybe, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Some people may prefer that.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't mind that too much. I think I don't know. That would have made it almost more confusing. I think either way, you've got a can of worms to deal with, because like if he's the new ghost, then you're like, okay, well, like you said, if it's Nadia, if it's the friend, then you're like, how the hell does she get here? How does she know where they are? Like, there is a can of worms.
I don't think it should be Nadia. Honestly, my take was just like, I thought it was just like, no, this is a ghost that belongs to this house. I mean, that was the first time we were watching it. That was my take.
Yeah, which kind of would have been, I guess, less emotionally resonant, but more logically sound.
Well said. And, I'm just going to end on saying, I still enjoyed it. It's worked for me in the moment, but, it's definitely not as tight as, say, The Sixth Sense.
Totally. Yeah, I agree.
I didn't realize that you've been working on a project of your own is it true for 15 years for this Jaws book?
Yeah.
What can you tell? Is it really been 15 years you've been trying to do a story?
Yeah. I mean,
obviously you've made a couple movies over that time and done some things.
Well, I've been working on a book about directing for 15 years. And it was always going to use as its spine a sort of shot by shot, scene by scene analysis of Jaws, just as a way of again, orienting people so that I could still go off into digressions, but that I always returned to a sort of narrative that pulls you through the book. Recently, within the last 6 months or so, I decided to change the approach from an analysis of the finished film, just going through it and breaking down every shot and every sequence, to, in order to aid this idea of what directing is and what the job really entails, a granular recreation of the experience of directing it.
Dear God, Keir.
I know. Soderbergh is writing a Jaws book, and he's been working on it for 15 years during a period when he's made countless hours of film and TV entertainment for us to enjoy. He is a madman, an absolute madman.
Yeah, we joke about us like being madmen trying to figure out presents and we're taping shit to the wall. But imagine like what Soderbergh's mood board looks like. My goodness. I mean, he's like the Jaws book, his own cuts of Raiders of the Lost Ark and Heaven's Gate in 2001, which we'll never see again because thanks a lot, Kubrick estate. But
yeah. Recuts of his own films, which will be released, or so he says, this year via his website, extension 765.
Ah, man, Keir, I'm going to miss this guy. We're like we said, we're nearing the end. I'm going to miss our man Soderbergh.
I'm not ready to let go. I'm not ready.
Well, I feel like there's a tie-in to you're going to float above the podcast. Now do you get the ending of Presents?
Now I understand. My soul is leaving my office.
You're leaving the pod. Our souls will depart the podcast.
Souls are leaving the podcast.
But you know what? Our souls aren't going anywhere. We don't have to let go, at least not today. Now, it is time to wrap things up. And while it might seem like we're wrapping up for our season, this being Soderbergh's final film to date, we still have much more to come. So please, dear listeners, stick with us.
As Mike said earlier in this episode, we are not done with our man Soderbergh, and we may never be, given his output. We're going to be covering Black Bag in a week, and we've got 2 other extravaganza episodes planned for this season.
We're going to rank our favorite movies from the back half of Soderbergh's career, just like we did with the first half. And then, to wrap things up, we've got to give our final all-time for all the marbles rankings of our favorite Steven Soderbergh movies.
I'm exhausted just thinking about it.
Yes. Me too.
And just like Soderbergh, we may have some other surprises up our sleeves as well.
Indeed.
Now, don't forget to come see us live at the Lake Street Theater in Oak Park or the Music Box in Chicago. Both are historic theaters, and both will be a lot of fun.
They will be. I am really looking forward to them. I know we both are. And as always, you can find us on Bluesky. We're on Instagram at the Filmographers, and we're even on TikTok now. Or you can just send us a old-fashioned email at thefilmographerspodcast@gmail.com.
Or visit us on Patreon, where you'll find all our episodes, merch, and more. We're at patreon.com/thefilmographerspodcast. That's patreon.com/thefilmographerspodcast.
Thanks as always to Kevin Lau, our producer, Gompson, who played and recorded our theme music, and Cosmo Graff, who designed our logo and our merch. Join us next time on the Filmographers Podcast as we get to our rankings. Where will the informant fit? How about Contagion, Kimmy, Logan Lucky?
Pretty near the top of the list, I'm going to say. Spoiler alert. Tune in next time and find out.